All right, for this demonstration, we're going to assume the arrow is traveling this direction, perpendicular to the frame. Now, when the arrow is perfectly aligned to the apparent wind direction, the apparent airflow, the shaft does not have any real exposed frontal area. It's just skin friction. It doesn't really contribute to the center of pressure very much. But the vanes, if the arrow is not spinning, have more frontal area exposed to that apparent airflow, and that is going to create a greater amount of pressure on the vane, well, positive pressure, high pressure on the leading side, and low pressure on the trailing side. It's going to move the aerodynamic center rearward quite a bit. Once it matches its twist rate, where the arrow is rolling as much as it is traveling forward in accordance with the angle you fletched on the vanes, that is going to only expose the actual thickness of the vane to the airflow as frontal area, and the rest will be skin friction as the shaft would be. And that will move the center of pressure forward more. The shaft doesn't normally contribute a large amount to the center of pressure because it's mostly skin friction, unless it is offset to the airflow. So the airflow is still traveling here. We now have a lot of surface area, a lot of frontal area exposed to the airflow, and that is going to move the center of pressure forward quite a bit. It'll never move it beyond the center of the arrow. Here's the actual center of the shaft. It'll never go beyond there because it'll be equal front and rear of that center point, but it does move it forward quite a bit. A broadhead has the same effect. It will also move the center pressure forward quite a bit, both when it's at static roll or like zero roll on launch, or when it's at full spin up RPM. It's full RPM matching the twist rate of the vanes or close to it depending on your broadhead. That will move your center pressure forward quite a bit. So on a very thin, very efficient target shaft like an X10, you can assume the center pressure would be way back here, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the arrow's length from the rear. Probably 15 to 20% is a little more accurate. This is a ballpark of a bell curve. Like, there's going to be variation based on the individual arrow setup, the shaft length, you name it. But it could very easily be back here at about 15% of the arrow shaft length. Very much so depending on your vanes more than any other component. For a thicker shaft hunting arrow, about this size, or 246, this would be a little more reasonable for a field point and otherwise effectively selected components. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of the arrow shaft's length from the rear of the arrow. With a broadhead, a fixed blade broadhead is a much larger range, and it can be anywhere in here, depending again on how efficient your broadhead is. When the arrow starts to really spin up and the vanes are aligned to the apparent wind flow, because of its roll rate, that center pressure is going to move forward a little bit. How much is based on your vane offset. But again, it's almost impossible for the center pressure to actually cross the center of the arrow shaft. Even with a really inefficient broadhead, it's almost never going to cross this point right here. But it can drastically change how much of your margin of stability is usable and is functional. So on a target arrow, outdoor target arrow with field points, like center of pressure being so far back is working in your favor. FOC kind of doesn't matter in terms of stability, but it does change how much you can see the corkscrewing effect from parachuting. So yes, it does affect how stable the arrow is, and that does affect the corkscrewing from parachuting. The visibility is different based on where your center of gravity is, because that's the axis of rotation for this nutation of the arrow. Where the center of gravity is further back, it's going to look, again, a little different and will affect visibility. The smaller movements will be easier to see, but the bigger movements will be, in theory at least, less common, less likely, because of the greater leverage the veins have to counteract the instability at range. It's part of why you will see the corkscrewing more on a lower FOC aero, but the exact amount is very hard to measure because it's far more dependent on the aerodynamic forces of your vein selection itself, the vein angle itself, and how much the aero is slowing down. Because arrows slow down over distance, when you have the air traveling along here, and then the arrow is no longer holding the speed sufficient for its twist rate. Say it reached 180 RPM with 300 feet per second even. Now the arrows slow down to about 270 feet per second over the course of 80 yards. It's pretty aggressive. But as an example, that would mean that the roll rate, its twist rate, has to be reduced to about 160. So now the high pressure side is over here, and this is the low pressure side. So the arrow is trying to slow down its twist rate instead, and that is creating extra drag and helping contribute to this parachuting. So there's a phenomenon where you see it as if the vein is holding in place and the point wanders around. And this is what some of the YouTubers and influencers are talking about. What's actually happening is it's still rotating around the center of gravity. You just don't see the point as easily as you see the veins, and the shaft movement being about the same on either side. This looks more stable, more stationary than the point does. And that's just because this spinning is confusing your eyes and making it look more stationary. For the hunters out there who are trying to avoid parachuting, the best thing you can do is only stick to a 2 degree, maybe 2.5 degree angle of fletching, and to choose a more aerodynamically optimized point so that when it is spinning up to its full RPM, it's not creating a ton of extra drag because it's no longer matching the efficient angles of the broadhead. The angle of attack created by its extra roll rate is not inducing additional drag as it's falling out of its range where it can tolerate the misaligned airflow. So a very efficient vein, and I think these count when the air is not perfectly aligned. Bring it back in frame. It's not perfectly aligned, and it's either oscillating from wind or from changing its roll rate. The air will stay attached pretty well at various angles of attack. For inefficient veins, if it falls beyond a certain range where it can't stay attached to the vein, it's going to drastically increase the drag and reduce the lift. It's an aerodynamic stall. That can happen with your broadhead if you have a large mismatch with the efficiency of your broadhead and with the angle of attack of your veins. So the veins are trying to spin at 200 RPM, your broadhead wants to spin at 0, and your broadhead's creating a ton of drag because you've averaged out in the middle at 100 RPM, because it's beyond its tolerance range for airflow to stay attached. Well, now your veins are also contributing to that, and that's going to create a ton of drag, slow down the aero, and help contribute to the corkscrewing, because it's no longer operating in a range where it's tolerating those imbalances and where the veins can dampen out and stabilize those perturbations, I think is the word, in aeroflight.